get started, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement. So I come to you today from the geographic area colonized as Corpus Christi, Texas, USA, a coastal community bordering the Gulf of Mexico. This space on Turtle Island was originally inhabited by the Ndi or Lipan Apache, the Karankawa, and the Gwawiltikan people, among others, whose tribal and nation names we have unfortunately forgotten. Our gratitude to the land and water and to the indigenous people who have and who continue to steward both. May we all commit today to eradicate the erasure of indigenous cultures wherever we live. As Joseph mentioned, we will be offering this presentation through YouTube, so we're streaming it live. For those of you who would like to provide questions for the panelists, we have that opportunity. And so I would ask that if you do, you use your smartphones or your tablets or things of that nature to go to Slido. It's slido.com website, and you can use the event code 8773. Again, that is Slido, slido.com, and the event code is 8773. And they have it up on the screens for those of you who are able to see that there. So before we get started with the panelists and the forum and so forth, I'd like to introduce our president and CEO, Dr. Kelly Miller.
Islanders, friends, welcome. We are very glad to have you here with us today as part of our celebration of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month here at the Island University. Now, during the next few weeks, we will be exploring and recognizing the achievements and the invaluable contributions of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders to our campus, to the United States, and to the world. We will celebrate cultural traditions and unique experiences that exist among Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, with more than 56 different ethnic groups speaking over 100 languages. Here at the Island University on our campus community, we are greatly enhanced by AAPI students, currently represented by 535 students with cultural heritage from countries such as China, Japan, Vietnam, India, and so many more. This is a valuable part of our student population, as well as our faculty and staff populations that we want to grow, that we want to celebrate, and we want to support as they work toward their goals and their dreams. But in order to provide comprehensive support, we cannot just celebrate. We must also come together to have difficult conversations about the racial climate on both our campus and within our community. Today, this incredible panel of students, faculty, and staff will share their experiences as well as share their feelings in the face of increased anti-Asian hate crimes. I would like to thank them in advance for their willingness to be with us here today, to speak out so that their voices can be heard. Next year, as we hopefully continue to return to normalcy, I look forward to continued and increased campus conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. I look forward to welcoming a newly hired Chief Diversity Officer to support and expand our efforts in these areas. Although I cannot stress enough, the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice is work that is for all of us, every one of us together. Standing against injustice requires difficult conversations are had and that all voices are heard. As Islanders, we must stand up and always do the right thing, never forgetting that if this is truly going to be an island for everyone, then we as Islanders must work together. So thank you to the panel, thank you to the committee that has put this month together. We are very grateful, and I will then get out of the way and allow the conversations to begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Miller, for coming up and speaking with those opening remarks. All right, so we're here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you also those of you who are joining us on YouTube. At this time, I'd like to have the panelists introduce themselves. We do have an undergraduate student here with us today, a graduate student, an alum, and a community member, and we also have a faculty member who has joined us, and they'll be sharing some of their lived experiences. So, Diutaro, can you get started, please, by introducing yourself?
Diutaro. I was born and raised in Okinawa, Japan. I was, sorry. Okay. My dad is in the military, so I was fortunate enough to live overseas for 17 years in a military community. And I came here my senior year of high school, and I was able to experience a cultural difference. Thank you.
My name is Patricia Maulu Oke Anu Nui Nani Kakit. I was born and raised in Hawaii. I am a PhD candidate at the Hart Research Institute, and I'm also a scholar in NOAA's Center for Coastal Marine Ecosystems.
My name is Newman Wong. I'm originally born and raised in Hong Kong, and I came to the States as an exchange student in high school, and I just love it here so much, so I stay. And I went to Del Mar, got my associate, and then I transferred over here, got my bachelor's in sociology, and went on to grad school, went around some other places, and I came back a couple of years ago, so I'm in the community again.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Leticia.
Hello, my name is Leticia Bohuyo. I am an associate professor of art, specifically in sculpture. I've been here at Corpus Christi for 4 years. I landed during Harvey, pretty much, so that was the not best welcome party ever. I'm originally from Illinois, Metropolis, Illinois. My background is Filipino, Chinese, French, Dutch. I'm biracial, and I went to Notre Dame for my undergrad, University of Tennessee, Knoxville for graduate school, and I've been a professor since 2001. First at Hanover College, then back at Notre Dame, and then here for the last 4 years. And it is a pleasure to be here, and thank you to everyone for coordinating this and adding this topic, which I know is not always the easiest topic to bring to the table, but I'm honored to be a part of that table.
Thank you so much. So yesterday, some of you may have watched or been a part of the session that was hosted by the AAPI committee, and the guest speaker, Dr. Kudashige, discussed a long history of Asian Americans and Pacific Islander incidents. Things that may have occurred prior to some of us being even born, right? So are you familiar with this history? And was it something that was shared within your family or community? And if so, what is it that you remember most and why? Or if not, why do you believe this was not shared within your family or the community? And Patricia, would you mind starting off?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, so I didn't say my cultural identification because I'm really nervous right now, but I identify as a Hapa Haole. Hapa Haole means you're half Hawaiian and the rest of you is foreign blood, so Haole means foreign. So I'm about half Hawaiian. I have some Filipino blood, Portuguese, Spanish, French, Irish. I might have a couple more, I can't remember. And growing up in Hawaii, it's really diverse. And I watched the thing yesterday and I was like, yeah, I learned about this in elementary. So I called my friend last night, I was like, what class did we learn this in? And she's like, yeah, what class did we learn it in? And there was no specific class for the history. I think they just made us do projects about our ancestry, and since everybody was so diverse, everybody had to bring their pedigrees and their ancestry, so we learned about it from each other. And I think we learned a lot about it from just discussions, like listening to our parents talk, you know, at the dinner table.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Newman or Diutaro, would you like to add anything?
Sure. I think I'm the only one here who was not born here, or not raised here. I'm still not an American. Right now, I'm a permanent resident, and I do plan to become a citizen very soon. But For the history part, I did not know a lot until I came here. I actually had to talk about a little bit. I'm teaching an introductory sociology class at Del Mar, so we're covering race right now, and we're talking about different racial groups, ethnic groups in the US, so I had to cover a little bit of the history of different groups. So, but I just want to bring up the point that all the racial groups basically social constructs, and I really did not identify myself as Asian until I came here. In Asia, if you go to Asia, most people would identify themselves by nationality. So this is a new concept to me when I first came, and I had to get used to it, learn about it. So just a point of reference.
Great, thank you. Diutaro?
I have a similar experience. We did identify each other as nationality, and coming here and, you know, being biracial, white and Asian, you know, you ask your parents, hey, what do I identify myself as? And then my dad is like, whatever you feel most comfortable with. And having to go through that, and growing up in a military community, you see all your friends coming and going, and you know, everything is just diverse. So when I came here and being the most different minority, really made me feel, you know, I was fine at first until I had my first interaction with immigration policies that was going on way back, and a couple people, I was just jogging the trail because I used to do cross country and I like to go outdoor running. They came up to me and was like, hey, where's your green card? And I was just like, I'm American, I have a US passport. And they were like, I better not see you around here or something's gonna happen. So, you know, I kind of just went home and I haven't been running ever since. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Leticia, how about you? Was this ever discussed with the family?
It wasn't discussed in family per se, and I went to a public high school. It was the only high school in the entire county, and so I went to the only high school available, and the topics discussed last night weren't part of that either. But I was fortunate at Notre Dame. I took a couple of courses. One specific history course was Making of Multicultural America was one of the history courses I took, and then a second literature class in the Irish immigrant experience. And so even though that's on Irish side as far as the dialogue, we're still discussing immigration law and the timeline and an overall discussion about what does migration versus immigration mean. So during the undergraduate experience, I was having that dialogue in my liberal arts courses. Additionally, when I was in undergrad, the school itself, the multicultural office, was really important to me. I became the president of the Filipino club, so we had our own organization, and it was through that network, through those communities, that people started sharing stories that I didn't necessarily have at home, that I wasn't a part of. And then here locally, I'm part of the Coastal Bend Phil-Am Club, and then I'm actually part of the Filipinx Artists of Houston organization. And so one of the things that I feel really important is to, you know, I can't fault my public education or my parents for not necessarily bringing up that discussion, but I've taken it upon myself, and then I try to include opportunities for my students to take it in too. As far as like that experience, like what you're describing, I didn't know I was necessarily something other growing up. No, I mean, you don't think about that when you're younger, but I do remember small stories. My town, the town I'm from, is Metropolis, Illinois, the hometown of Superman. They named it Metropolis because they thought it was going to be a big city, and it never got past 7,000 people. So it's this little tiny town. And the doctors in town, 4 out of 5 were all Asian doctors that were brought to the U.S. during the Vietnam War because there were not enough doctors in the Midwest. And so of the Asian families, there were very specific dialogues as far as like there was a discussion about race, but there's also a discussion about class and professionalism. So there's some very complicated things that were going on growing up. But I remember one moment, my mom had myself and my brothers in the shopping cart going around a grocery store, and people would come up to her and like, oh, they're so cute, where'd you get them? as if we were, and so she returns and says, the hard way. Because my father's the one who's Filipino-Chinese, my mom is the one she's Caucasian, she's from the US. And so this dialogue that you must be something else. There's no way that you exist. And that's something that I recognize, and I take pause every time I come to those boxes that you're supposed to check. To this day, at 45 years old, I still pause which box to check. What am I today? Who do I identify with? And so that education, though, helps me to give terminology, and that talk last night, I think, helped remind me of how deep this discussion needs to continue to be.
Great, thank you for sharing that. You actually bring up a good point that was also discussed yesterday. What was brought to the table in that presentation were the statistics of what makes up the American Asian Pacific Islander population, right? And so there were some pretty large numbers there, right? And so just to give you some context, those of you out in the audience and online, Dr. Kudashige shared that there are over 22 million Asian Americans in the world. And then he kept on breaking that down. Of those, 1.4 million are Pacific Islanders. The largest groups within that are Chinese, Filipino, Indian, Vietnamese, Korean, and Japanese. So the largest growing populations, bear with me here, I'm going to get to that point, are South and Southeast Asians, right? Here in Texas, we have 1.5 million Asians, right? We're the third in the U.S. after California and New York. And of those, 25,000 are Pacific Islanders. In Nueces County, we have around 8,000, based on some data that I looked at that we found. And then here on our campus in fall of 2019, our percentages showed 1.82% for Asian female and 1.46. So you out of our enrollment of about 11,400 back then. Although, again, the point that you made, which box do we check off, right? Because not everyone identifies as Asian American or Pacific Islanders. So how does that make you feel to be included in AAPI when you're having to choose either one box or no box or other? Does anybody like to share that? Patricia?
Can you guys hear me? Okay. So this is the first time anyone's ever told me that I was a American Asian, and people have called me Pacific Islander, but my grandparents always told me don't check that box. They said check other and write in Hawaiian because we're very different from a lot of the other Pacific Islanders. Each has its own culture and their own languages. But then, if you think about the history of Polynesia and Micronesia, at some point we were Southeast Asian and we figured out how to voyage and we colonized the Pacific Ocean. So I guess I'm kind of a colonizer. So we got to Hawaii and then we turned into Hawaiians, right? Also in Hawaii, we view things a little differently. Like they don't really see themselves as Asian. We appreciate each group. So you're gonna eat Filipino food or you're gonna eat Chinese food, and there's a lot of cultural exchange. So it's a new concept to me, and I'm still kind of processing the whole thing. I'll probably have to go and talk to my counselor about it to figure out how I really feel, and then I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. Newman or Ditaro?
So obviously as a military child, I was saying the pledge all the time. So I believed what it stands for, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I just saw myself as everyone that is sitting here in this room. I didn't see myself any different. I believed that we all believed in the same concept, and we strive for justice and liberty. And then when I came here and I had a couple unfortunate events that made me realize, maybe I am different. So, I want us as a university, as this movement, to be a model and show that we are one, and hopefully spread to the community and the whole nation. Thank you.
Newman? Anything to add?
Sure. I think sometimes it's really difficult to, especially when I first came to identify myself as Asian because it's a new concept to me. But I did learn it, but I just want to remind you again, if you go to Asia, people don't identify themselves as Asian because, or just Pacific Islander, every place or every country or region has their own language. Even within their own country, there's a lot of diversity in their languages and culture. So being lumped into one group sometimes just oversimplifies the idea of diversity within all the cultural groups. So, but
You good? Okay.
To add in, I sometimes process through imagining, oh, there we are. Hi. I sometimes process through imagining what the role of that specific box is going to be. And so what demographic am I going to help the most in? So is this a group that needs me to sign in this box more than this box? And also, is there an other or is there a multicultural box that I can actually check? And so I try to weigh those out. Other pauses I take, I was like, am I Latin? Because since Spain ruled the Philippines for over 400 years, and this is the 500th birthday this year of Magellan landing in the Philippines, discovering the Philippines. And so I think about that, is it Latin? Because of that background and that history, is it Asian enough? Am I Latin enough? Am I white enough for which box? But then as someone thinking about what is it that would help the most, and so more often, since I visibly show as Asian, I most likely will check Asian if I only have one choice. If I have multiracial, then I'll fill that one in and then I'll write in my other. But if it's one that I know that they need more numbers, then I'll go back to the Asian. And so I probably overprocess it more than needed. But I recognize that I feel that I have a point and a privilege to be able to represent, and that I want to make sure that I can stand up for people who might not be able to stand up or to fill in that box the way that I can.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
We do have a question that's come in through Slido, so I want to make sure that I honor the questions that are out here in the room. This question is, have you noticed TAMU-CC professors treating you as a model minority or different in some way because of your race? What would you want all the faculty to know? Go ahead, Patricia.
Okay. So before I came here, I went and I talked to a bunch of students and I asked them what they experienced, because there are students who identify more as Asian than I do. I usually identify as Hawaiian. And I'm with Leticia on that. I have the face of a Hawaiian, but I also have the face of a Mexican or Hispanic. So, whoever needs me most, I'm there for them. But what I've seen on campus is, so some students said they overheard professors kind of minimizing the accomplishments of Asian professors and kind of their lab groups because, they're doing well because they're Asian. Mm-hmm. And so that really minimizes all the hard work that they put into it. They work 10 times as hard to be shining in the light. And I think a lot of other students do it as well. And so that's kind of my little tidbit. I have seen, I've noticed, so I can sit in with, Haole students because I'm a pineapple, right? I can go anywhere. And I noticed when Asians will leave the room, they'll be made fun of for the way they speak. And so there's a lot of closet racism that happens, I think, among professors and students. So I'm not quite sure what to do about it, but I'll tell you, what I've seen.
Titaro or Newman, have you experienced that? And I know, Newman, you're an alum now, but when you were here or in any of your other experiences at other universities or in the community for that matter?
Well, whenever I do well in school or classes, as growing up, my parents put me in both Japanese and American school. So I did my time, and after classes, I would go to Gakken, which was basically a extracurricular study area, right, where they would tutor me and give me extra homework. So I did my time to, educate myself even further. Fortunately, my parents really cared for my education. But you know, I'm just not born with it.
I think that's a very good point. You had to work just as everyone else did, right, for that. Leticia, when we met as panelists, just in preparing for this, you shared some insight into your thoughts about the model minority experience. Would you mind sharing that with everyone today, please?
I don't remember the exact anecdote I shared, but what comes to mind right now is that with the model minority myth, the idea that comparing minority groups to basically diminish the experience of other groups and to compare that you should be meek or you should be quiet like the Asian group. So therefore, my experience has also been, if I speak up, if I challenge someone, I get sometimes pushed down against or even ridiculed in subtle ways sometimes. It might come out later. So something else might be held over my head, or I might be quote unquote punished in another way because they were expecting me to be maybe more soft, more meek, because I'm female and Asian. And so if I speak up, if I point something out, if I challenge a discussion, if I bring on dialogue, and this has been throughout my life, then I actually get things maybe harder for me. And so that's been part of the minority myth as far as being a model citizen, that you're supposed to be like a certain type and be positioned and speak in a certain way. But I don't speak that way, and that's not the way that I represent. And I teach welding, and I teach foundry, and I'm 5'2", but this is who I am. But I also recognize, as you're describing, I was valedictorian out of my experience of being in high school, and I was on the golf team, and I do karate, and I was really good at math because I like math. I'm a math geek, and it shows up in my sculpture. I'm fascinated by physics, and that shows up in my sculpture. But I wasn't encouraged to take art because you're supposed to be in math. So that's another part of the minority myth that would happen. Then on top of that, you're doing good in these classes because you're Asian. But they didn't see or they didn't recognize how many hours are spent doing the work behind it because you're already good at that. And then if you do well, then it's then excused away because you're supposed to be doing well. And so it comes sort of like double-edged sword within that. And so you find yourself, at least I did, find yourself sometimes questioning whether or not, like, how to step up and how to be able to be proud of what you've done, while at the same time to be able to, is my position now as a professor, to try to make sure that I observe how I treat my students and how is it that I want to bring their voices out, how is it that I want to make sure to model for them.
Newman, you were a student here with us several years back, founder of one of our fraternities, right? And also quite involved with our student organizations and ICA, if I remember correctly, and the Southeast Asian Association. Did you ever feel any of that model minority in those experiences? So maybe not in the classroom, but maybe with your peers?
I did actually have some experience.
Would you mind sharing that?
I don't mind. Before I came to the US, I really was just a average student. I really did not like school too much. I did go to cram school in Hong Kong, which everyone, all students, if they could afford it, they would do it. But after I came here, I really enjoy what I'm learning. So I was a science student in Hong Kong, and when I came here to college, I majored in sociology. By the way, my parents still don't know what I study, even though I got 2 degrees in it, 3 degrees in it. They still don't know what it is, which is fine. I can make a living, take care of myself. But I remember when I went to Del Mar and I took a evening chemistry class, and everyone just wanted to. I was 19, 20, and all my classmates were older than me, but they knew I kind of knew what I was doing. They all wanted to do labs with me, and even the instructor wanted me to major in chemistry, which I really don't like. So that's my model minority experience in classroom that I remembered the most. I'm glad that I did not major in chemistry, otherwise I would never graduate. But I know, I think when you study something you're interested, you get more passion about it. So when I was here, I got very lucky to have really good professors. I also minored in public relations, so I did have Kelly as a professor for a couple of classes, and now I cannot stop talking. But my experience in college here is really good, was really good, and I did enjoy doing a lot of stuff when I was a student here, especially what I have learned here has been a part of my job now. I do institutional research at Del Mar, so one of the research projects I did here as an undergraduate student was to do a campus climate survey, and it got shared with different committees and faculty and staff at that time, and I took on to graduate school, and it became my first publication in an academic journal with that data. So I think, yeah, that both positives and negatives being the model minority.
Thank you. So each of you have mentioned that you identify in multiple ways, right? And so how do you help either yourself or others who are like you with intersecting identities have a voice at the table? Anybody want to jump in, or do I need to assign?
Okay, so
Thank you, Patricia.
I was invited. Am I at the table?
Yes.
This is the table.
You're at the
I
table.
made it to the table. So I was invited by another girl who's from Hawaii. So I think that's kind of an example of, you know, helping someone who's like you. Hold on, I wrote this down somewhere. So I guess showing up today, you know, that's helping people who are like me have a voice at the table. Having the support of people from my community really helps. So I brought a lot of people here with me. I brought my safe space with me, and they're sitting in the audience. I also feel like the Heart Research Institute has been a real safe space for me. And I also feel like the NOAA CCME program that I am in is a safe space. So it's not really a room or a place, but it's kind of a network of people who support you and understand you and kind of share the same struggles. So I try to find people who are like me and train them the best I can so I can help put them in a position of leadership so that one day we can all fight together.
Great. Leticia, how about a different perspective from from a faculty perspective? Like, how do you help bring perhaps to the table that voice for students who may not feel comfortable stepping forward as Patricia does?
Certainly. I think about it in a couple of different ways. One way is as an art professor. And so in art, my goal is to help students find their artistic voice, not my artistic voice. I don't need Leticiaites running around. I don't want them to make my work. My goal is to help them find the way to channel and to unfold what is their artistic voice. What is it that's behind them? And so finding ways to help that come out. And for someone who might be neurologically diverse, so it's not just race, but there's other diversities. And so making sure that my class teaching allows for that dialogue and all of them have a room at the table and giving them a different approach. I think one of the things that has happened this last year due to COVID, some of the students who are naturally extroverts are great at participation, but the introverts not necessarily. And so I think what's happened within COVID and Zoom, you all have to mute yourselves, right? And you have to unmute. And so it ends up equaling the playing field. Somebody who's 6 foot tall and somebody who's 5 foot tall are the same size in a box. And so sometimes I've been actually using Zoom as a way to level that playing field and bring everyone to the table. Something else that I've made sure to do, and this was even pre-COVID, I've removed participation as a component of a grade, because people naturally might participate more because of their background. And so someone who is Asian or Hispanic, their culture might tell them not to speak up, or their race or their gender might encourage them not to speak up. And it's not necessarily them, it's just that maybe they've been scolded in a way. And that might be outside of race and gender, it could also be home upbringing. And so how to make sure everyone has room. And so I've tried to make sure that the dialogues and the ways that I have critique and that they share feedback and the way that they have ideas that are developed, and that there's more than one way to be able to nurture that out. And so I do that at every level of my classes all the way through the graduate students. Another side that I play is that I serve on probably too many boards. And so I'm a board member for the Mid-South Sculpture Alliance. It's a sculpture organization that is now more of a national level, but it started in the Mid-South. It started in Tennessee. And one of the things I do on that board is I'm on the board nominations committee. I'm actually the chair of that. And so I've built a matrix that as the board nominations committee, everybody has to help me gather data. If you're going to nominate someone, we need more data because we don't want two people all from Atlanta, like all the members. But is there an age? Is there a type of art? Is there something else that they can bring to the table? And so we've also added in 2 new board member roles that are for emerging artists. That wasn't there before, and something that I really pushed, that I felt really empowered by, that they supported. And so how do we help bring up? And so I couldn't have done that if I wasn't taking the time to be on the board and taking the energy and spending the extra dues to be able to be at that table. I'm also on the Texas Sculpture Group Board, which is a parallel group in Texas, and on the International Sculpture Committee, which is the International Sculpture Center. They produce Sculpture Magazine. I'm on their conference committee helping that dialogue along. And so by taking the extra time, which I know that it's just like takes another one of the stars away from how much time I have in the day, but one of the things that I can do with that opportunity as a professor and as at that table is to try to find ways to open up. So I prep my students on one side to be ready to talk, and on the other side, can I help make sure that there's some doors that can open for them sooner than the doors open for me? And so that's, I feel, very, very important, like what you're describing, Patricia, like you acknowledge and you see, and how is it that you can lift up while at the same time lifting yourself up? And so I really appreciate what you do.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
This was a question that came from a student yesterday during a conversation, and so I'd like to get the student perspective, if I could, from this. What is your biggest pet peeve or things that bother you the most as it relates to your own culture and wish people wouldn't do or say?
Okay. So as a student, I guess my pet peeve is, just the assumption of my identity is something that I don't really like. I feel like simple questions like how are you or what is your name, and like just doing an introduction question is much better than just assuming someone's ethnic group or where they belong in society. So I think just simple questions, simple conversations can really just help one another to get to know each other and avoid hurting someone else's feelings.
Great, thank you. Patricia?
All right. This one has bothered me for a long time. Don't ask me to dance hula. I don't know how to dance hula. My mom was a professional hula dancer, and so, in Hawaii, we all have to learn how to dance hula when we're young. And I was terrible at it. You can imagine the disappointment that my mom had that I had 2 left feet. And so I don't like to be, kind of looked at like a wiggly hula doll. I kind of want to be looked at, how you see Moana? Mm-hmm. I want to be a scientist when people see me and talk to me. Also, I'll cut your pineapples for you because I learned how to do it in the tourist industry, and we would cut it for, tourists. But I don't cut pineapples and eat them at home like that. They're okay. But, I don't cut pineapples because I'm a Hawaiian. It's because, I worked in the tourist industry. Another thing that bothers me is when someone who is not Hawaiian tries to speak on behalf of Hawaiians. I feel like you should always direct that, the conversation to a Hawaiian. So in this case, it's about, the Stop Asian Hate movement. So if I feel like somebody around me knows a little bit more about it, has better, more experience with it, I'll definitely stand next to them. I will stand behind them, but I will not stand in front of them.
Newman, is there anything that you would like to share on your things that bother you?
Bother me. It's part of my identity, so I identify myself as Chinese, but I grew up in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong was a British colony, and now it's part of China. And when people just said he's from China, I just felt that part of my identity got taken away. I actually donated the Hong Kong flag in the at the UC when I was a student. I think it's still here.
It is. It is still up in the rotunda. We take them down every now and then for International Education Week and Parade of Nations, but otherwise it is still there. We have not taken them down. So thank you for donating that. There's a question that came in also on Slido, so thank you. Keep them coming. It makes my job a little bit easier. Kind of turning a little bit in a different direction, but what student orgs do we need at TAM-UCC to help Asian American or Pacific Islander students feel more included in the campus community? Any thoughts?
So this one is weird for me because I feel embraced by the Hispanic community, and I felt embraced, I guess, by the Asian community. I feel, like they're part of my community, as well as like the people in South Texas, because, that aloha spirit is real similar to the, that Southern hospitality. But on campus, I had helped revive the SACNIS chapter, which is the Society for the Advancement of Hispanics, Chicanos, and Native Americans in Science. And it's an umbrella society. So I'm not Native American, I am Hispanic, but they welcome Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, Asians, they welcome everybody. And it's kind of this general knowledge that we're all working towards the same goal for inclusivity. And so it was kind of like building a community on campus. So if we could have, if you feel like you don't have a sense of community, then you build one. So go find an organization that represents you. Or, you can call me and we can join SACNIS and revive it again. You can always do that.
Thank you for sharing that. Here's another question that's come in, and we're going to flip it a little bit from student orgs, but how has the reference of COVID-19 as the Chinese virus from the former occupant of the White House impacted your life? Thoughts on increased hate crimes? And what role, I'm going to add a little bit to that, but what role do you think the media should play in all of that? Or what responsibility do they have? It's a pretty deep one.
Okay. So it's not, if you think about like the media, my friend just posted this thing on Facebook, and she talked about responsible journalism. Her name is Nicole Yamase, and she is the first Micronesian to go to the deepest part of the ocean that a human being has ever been to. And so she talked about, I guess there was an article about her in The Guardian, and she did a shout out. She said, this is what responsible journalism looks like. In Hawaii, they portray Micronesians as, being arrested, breaking all these laws. And so we get a negative stereotype from it. I think just a week ago, a Micronesian was killed by the police. So if you're not showing us in a positive light, bad things might happen to us later. So you think about the China virus. There's, they're always talking about the Asian invasion, and it perpetuates a negative stereotype. And eventually, communities might get hurt. From my own personal experience, I really appreciate the university for how they handled Izzy the Islander, because it was in the headlines as controversial, and that's negative for me, so I don't want to look like some Hawaiian who's screaming cultural appropriation, because nobody really knows how similar Hawaii is to this, to Corpus Christi. It's like, okay, we all walk around in flip-flops. It's a beach culture. There's surfers. All the surfers use the shaka sign. There's that Southern hospitality. There's so many similarities. Plus, everybody at the campus, they all look like me. So I feel like I'm at a home away from home. But the headlines kind of made me look bad. And I was scared because I didn't want to have that negative stereotype. I'll go with the hula dancer before I go with, somebody who's crying racism for no reason, right? If you don't have that context, then you won't understand how it affects us. Like Izzy the Islander kind of looks like what you would find in a tiki bar, right? And we have tiki bars everywhere. Culture is appropriated in so many ways, like surfing. It originated in Hawaii. We're claiming that. We shared it with the world. And we don't have a problem with anyone surfing. Moana, that's cultural appropriation, but it gives me a positive stereotype. And so That's all I have to say about that.
Oh, thank you very much for sharing that. We really do appreciate it, to get a perspective of someone who's living that experience and providing that insight for us. So I really appreciate it. Does anybody else want to talk about like how the media has perpetuated, some of this, or your initial response to the shootings in Atlanta and what that means, and how did that make you all feel?
Terrified. But I feel very grateful for this campus community and for Corpus Christi in that I'm fortunate, my family, we haven't directly felt any of the violence, but you see it right on the news, and I think responsible journalism is determining what is actually news. And so what do you put out there? What do you keep putting out there? What is it that you share? And seeing someone say Kung Flu again and again doesn't help. That's like yelling fire in a movie theater. And so it's just putting a flame on a particular type of person, no matter how many years and generations they may have been in the US, and how they might identify. And so it's responsible journalism would be trying to tone down something that would be actually inappropriate to be shared. And so I think that has continued to be obviously fanned, and I feel so much sorrow for the families who across the country have been violently attacked, or their shops have been left out as far as they've been boycotted. And so something that I think very firmly about is like, what can we do? You donate. You donate to organizations that can help. You make sure if you're going to go out to dinner, you're going to buy, if there's a organization, if there's a store that has been left out, that they've been maybe left behind because they are an Asian group, and maybe people have fallen for that news publicity of it being a Chinese flu, and they're so therefore avoiding certain restaurants or certain nail salons because of an identified visual group, that's who you then support. That's who you help out. But yeah, no, that's not responsible journalism. That's been scary.
So I wouldn't necessarily consider it journalism, but with social media platforms and so forth, what advice or what things or tips might you have for our students who are constantly on TikTok, right, or on Instagram, and they just or Twitter, and they just retweet thinking, oh, this is okay. What sorts of advice might you give to those individuals when they're helping to perpetuate, right, some of that Asian hate without thinking about what's going on?
I recommend students to do their own research, especially in this society. A lot of context is put out to the media, whether it's true or fake. Everybody goes on Facebook, sees a conspiracy theory, and goes, oh, hey, did you hear about this, and believes that it's true. There's even for like the coronavirus that's going on, people just assume things that are not true. There's resources out there that's backed by research and science, and I think people need to look deeper into things instead of being superficial. And for the media aspect, as in like news, I think they really started putting out a lot of negative aspects and less positive. I really like to go on just Google and look up good news sometimes just to see that the world is doing good. Like the news that was saying in the Gulf over here, a coral reef has grown 3 times greater, and I love it, So, I just wish that, the world becomes a brighter place.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you to those who are submitting questions. I see one here that says, what do you think TAMU CC should do to better support the local AAPI community? It's okay. We want you to be honest. We know that we're not perfect here on campus, right? And so we want ways to see how we can better support. If you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, so this university has taken really, really good care of me. Whenever anything has ever happened to me, the first thing, you know, they do is let's make sure you're protected and let's make sure you're safe, right? But a lot of times when I was faced with issues, I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to talk to. I was terrified. And I didn't realize what was happening to me. And like in retrospect, I'm like, oh yeah, okay. But I needed to talk to someone, and I needed someone to tell me, was this right or wrong? And so I think if the resources were out there and we felt free to go without being punished for bringing it up, that would be super helpful for me. And I guess you, everybody.
Yeah. So just to touch up on that, I do think maybe we should market more often. And then, you know, having like, you know, what Patricia, you mentioned earlier about closet talks after classes and stuff. You know, I would get them, but then, you know, I would just feel, I would think that it's normal, you know, just to get these. And basically just, you know, take it and then go on with your day.
Here's another question. The campus focuses a lot on the unique needs of Hispanic students, but what are the unique needs of AAPI students that the university is overlooking right now?
I'm Hispanic and I'm Asian now, and I'm Pacific Islander. So we have a lot of the same needs, basically. We want to be able to celebrate our culture. We want to be able to be ourselves without being punished. So I want to wear this shirt that looks tribal, and I want it to be okay, and I want to still be a scientist. I think Hispanics struggle with fighting their stereotypes as well. Like, I'm Hispanic, but really I'm Hawaiian. So we could all actually work together, and I love that the model minority thing came out, because Asians are basically going first. Every other minority group needs to watch what happens to them, because what happens to this Asian group is gonna happen to us. If you're a Hispanic group, what happens to the Asians is gonna happen to us. It's gonna happen to Hawaiians, because eventually we're gonna fill all those spots that, right? You're supposed to represent this many people from, you know, from the population. Eventually Hispanics will fill their slots, Hawaiians will fill their slots, and we're gonna face the same struggles. So this is an opportunity for us to come together and like really drive the narrative.
Great. Leticia, did you want to?
Sure. I think one of the things with the AAPI, which came up yesterday in the talk, which is also acknowledging how broad the actual grouping is, and not everybody, as mentioned earlier, feels comfortable being underneath that, but how those links work, what are some of those relationships, how many different cultures are actually within that, like small little acronym. And the same thing happens, I think, across the board in other racial groups. And so rather than it only being Heritage Week or Heritage Month, and that it's a dialogue that needs to be more pervasive. And so are there other places where it's not like all of a sudden there's this token opportunity, like, you know, we did it, we checked our box, we did our thing, but making sure that there's events and speakers that are across the university, and so that way it's not siloed into these specific moments, but that it's a educational academic experience that touches in on every discipline and every topic, and that visibility, you know, making sure that we see ourselves there. And ourselves is a lot of different groups. And so for me, one of the things that happened for me when I was in grad school, I worked with the first female sculptor that had ever been one of my professors. I worked with only male faculty and only male graduate students. And she wasn't Asian, she wasn't from the Midwest, but I identified, and all of a sudden I could see myself there. I could see myself in that moment, because she had a dialogue in her work about her history and about her gender. And so she opened a door just by who she was. She didn't say it, but she was it. And so if we have speakers, maybe there's events, there's performances, that there's things that happen across campus that make its way to our social media, that make its way to our front page, and then it's not just that separate event that you have to go to only if you're interested. Well, I'm not really interested in that. how can we make sure that that activity, that moment happens in other situations where you're not necessarily planning to go to the Asian American Pacific Island event, and so make it more pervasive.
365, right?
Right?
All year long. Great. Thank you so much. I think I'm going to have time for about 2 more questions that have come in, just looking at time. But here's a question for the panel. And Newman, I'll ask if you will take this question first. What may be some innovative practices or ways that you have seen promoting more inclusivity in communities? I'm friends with Newman on Facebook, to be honest, and so Newman travels a lot, so perhaps you can provide that insight. But what can be done to make communities safer?
I think education is the main thing. When I want to address the question was asked earlier about supporting the community, not just at the university, but the AAPI community in general. I personally, myself, I went through SARS in Hong Kong in 2003, right before I came to the States. So this is nothing brand new to me. I did wear a mask. I did all the safe practices. So that living experience, I did not know I would have to do it again here. So before everyone was asked to wear masks, I was wearing masks. I knew it. I actually bought some masks to send that I was going to send home, but I end up using them myself. So and it was not really fun, and it's just really sad to see the hate toward Asian Americans. And I believe the best way to address the issue, to make the community that is more inclusive, is through education. At my last job, I was teaching part-time in sociology too, and at that campus, we had a lot of students from the Caribbean islands, and a lot of them on scholarships. So there were some negative tweets about the Caribbean students getting all the scholarships, just being very hateful. So I was teaching a race and ethnicity class at that time. So what I did is to have a panel like this and have my students serving as the panelists after they have read from what they have learned from the class, and we had a couple of professors, and so to make it an educational opportunity. And another thing is really to have meaningful contact interactions. If you refer to the contact theory, we're not really that much difference. We obviously are physically different, but we have very similar values. We value families, friends, and so on. So we have more commons than differences. So I think if we have a lot more meaningful opportunities like this for people to understand we're more similar than different, that would be very helpful.
Great. Would anybody else like to add on that? What other sorts of support do you think we could offer out in our community?
I personally think ICA does a great job of creating events for diversity and appreciation. Going to these events, you feel like everyone is, islanders, we're all islanders, we're all attending this event, we're all students, staff, faculty members, we're all just enjoying the time there. So I think ICA really does a great job of what they do, and I really appreciate them.
All right. Well, thank you so much, panelists, for joining us today. I want to thank all of you for also coming out today and showing support for this panel. I would encourage you to also look at AAPI.tamucc.edu for other events that you can help support. And as Newman mentioned, continue to educate yourself. We have to take it upon ourselves to learn this. I want to applaud you all for sharing your experiences, but these are not the only people that we can learn from. We need to learn ourselves and not put it all on them to help us learn what this is all about. Thank you for those of you who joined us today on YouTube. I would like to let you all know that if you missed any portion of this or you came in, it will be available on YouTube, so please share it as an opportunity for other students, maybe on social media, who weren't able to attend. So I thought we were going to pull it up, but I guess not. So the AAPI website is available for other events. Thank you for spending your time today. Have a good day, and I appreciate it. Let's give our panelists a round of applause.